Marshall Chriswell is on the line with us this morning. It's another edition of Marshall Law. Information on this segment should not be taken as legal advice. Laws can vary by jurisdiction and circumstance, and you should consult with a competent attorney licensed to practice law in your jurisdiction. And Marshall Chriswell is on the line with us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us here today. I want to ask you about something that maybe not a lot of people are aware of, and that is adult adoption. When one adult adopts another one, what are the circumstances that would bring that about?
So there are, multiple, circumstances that could lead to an adult adoption. And under Pennsylvania law, any adult can adopt any other adult, and of course there are some limitations, but for the most part, two consenting and competent adults, one can adopt the other. And this is often, you often see it in context of where there's already an established parent-child relationship. So maybe this was a stepchild that has grown into adulthood, and the parent has raised the child, for a good portion of their life, and they want to memorialize and formalize that parent-child relationship, or maybe where they're maybe a foster parent situation, right, where you have custody and legal rights as a foster parent. A child becomes an adult, and maybe an adoption wasn't possible whenever they were a minor, but now they've grown to adulthood, and they say, well, you're really the person I look to as my parent, and we want to formalize this adoption relationship. And so those are just a couple of scenarios where I've seen adult adoptions.
Also, I would assume special needs adults, right?
Sure. So special needs, if there's a parent-child relationship there, and we want to memorialize that and legalize that relationship for health benefits or the ability to make decisions, as becoming a legal next of kin to someone. That's one of the benefits of an adult adoption or any adoption is you become this person's closest relative, and so that comes with some legal decision-making power.
And I would think then, therefore, that there would be some special issues having to do with the legalities that are involved in something like this. What are some of those issues? Sure.
So, as I said, there are some limitations, right? You've got to file a petition, and somebody's got to be a resident of the county where you're filing that petition. Both of the adults need to be competent and able to articulate and consent to the adoption. This can't be a romantic relationship, right? I've had you've seen and heard of situations where there's an attempt to do an adoption of a romantic partner for inheritance purposes and things like that. So that's generally not going to be permitted. So as long as you don't have any of these hurdles, then the procedure is that generally you're represented by counsel. Counsel represents the both parties and files an adoption petition with the court. It's a little more streamlined than a minor a child adoption because you don't have to have with a child adoption you've got to have a home study a lot of times and background checks and things. There's not those kinds of requirements on an adult adoption. So ultimately you're filing a petition and the court's holding a hearing and doing some fact finding and making sure that this is a permissible adoption. But then you get an adoption decree and you can determine, whether there's going to be a name change or not, and that can be done as part of that process. That's just generally procedurally how it works.
So when this consideration is being made, obviously you want to get your attorney involved and sit down, and there are plenty of issues for you to go over, correct?
There are. One of the biggest benefits of in adult adoption, and a lot of times, one of the driving forces behind it is for estate planning purposes. If I have a child now an adult, but someone that I've raised or that looks to me as a parent, and I want them to inherit from me as though they were a child, maybe in conjunction with my other children, an adoption can be really beneficial because in Pennsylvania, as we've talked about before, Todd, we have an inheritance tax. And whenever a third party is inheriting from you, someone who's not related, doesn't matter if they've lived with you and you've raised them for their entire life, if someone that you're not related to inherits from you, there is automatically a 15% inheritance tax on any assets that are distributed that are allocated to that person. So by doing an adult adoption, you can reduce that inheritance tax from 15% down to 4.5%. So that's a benefit and an incentive to doing it. But also we really, as you said, part of that consultation and part of the advice, you've got to really get into the situation and make sure that this is a benefit, because you have to realize that everybody can only have one set of parents, right? And so whenever you do an adoption, by the nature of that, you are also severing a legal relationship between the adult being adopted and their biological parents.
Mm-hmm.
Is that so it's important to talk through those issues and make sure that it's what makes sense for everyone.
Yeah, and in that case, would the original parents or birth parents would they have a right to contest?
They do not. That's another difference. With a child adoption, you've got to go through a process before you can even get to the adoption part of the legal proceeding. You've got to go through a process to sever or terminate the parental rights of the other parent, and they can agree to that. It can be done by consent, or it can be done involuntarily in the case where a parent has abandoned a child or abused or otherwise not met a legal definition of not really being a parent. So you have to go through that process for a child. With an adult, the biological parents have no say. But again, like I said, there's an analysis to do there. Well, does it make sense from a family and emotional perspective? Also, does it make sense from a financial and tax perspective?
I would assume then, therefore, that the birth parents would want to adjust, or perhaps want to adjust their estate plan.
Everybody would need to do that. That's something that you're changing. We have talked before about when do you update your will? When do you pull out your old will and you look at it, and when should you think about doing an update? A change in your family situation is really probably the number one reason that you make changes to your will. And whenever you're changing a legal parent-child relationship, both for the prior parents and the new parents, that's definitely one of those situations. Another benefit for establishing that parent-child relationship, if let's say that a parent has the adoptive parent, the person who's adopting the adult, say they do make a will, and let's say they have not done the adoption, right? They have this child that they provide for this child in their will, and then the will gets contested and the will gets thrown out for some reason. Well, if you've done an adult adoption, then the parent-child relationship exists, and the child is still going to inherit from you, even if your will is found to be invalid for some reason.
Are adult adoptions all that common?
They're not all that common. I've done several in my career. I'm aware of quite a number of them. But it's something that in certain circumstances it just makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it sounds like a fascinating aspect of your job that maybe people might not have considered in the past, and I'd be interested to know over the course of the next couple of weeks if somebody might come to you and say, "Hey, I heard that, and I was wondering about that," and let's talk it through. And that's really those considerations, those conversations have to be held, I would assume, and they would get pretty in depth.
They would, that type of consultation, definitely involves, let's talk about family history. Let's get into, how did this relationship, this parent-child relationship begin? Which, it definitely gets into a lot of kind of family history stuff, and then, like I said, the financial and tax consequences of doing or not doing an adoption. So it is, there are a lot of considerations, but like I always said, I try to have those frank discussions and make sure to try to explain things in a way that people can understand what the benefits and drawbacks of every decision they're making.
Yeah, you really do. In every situation, you need to have everything explained to you so that you know exactly what you're getting into or getting out of. Marshall, thank you so much for being with us. If somebody wants to take up this issue or any other legal issue with you, what should they do?
You can always give me a call, 724-465-5826. Stop and see us. We're in the old R&P Cole building here at 655 Church Street in Indiana, or go online, check us out, www.westernpalawyer.com.
Have a great day.
Thanks, Todd. Take care.